I never thought I'd see the day when someone would be so entitled that they'd interrupt a funeral procession, but living in Oakwood Estates for the past 3 years has taught me that there's no limit to what some people will do when they think they're in charge. Our HOA president, Karen Wilkinson, had always been insufferable with her clipboard inspections and violation notices for grass that was a quarter-inch too tall, but what happened last Tuesday crossed a line that I didn't even know existed. It was a somber morning. My neighbor across the street, Mr. Jenkins, had passed away after a long battle with cancer. He was a retired veteran, beloved by everyone in the neighborhood except, of course, Karen. Mr. Jenkins had been fighting with her for years over the American flag he proudly displayed in his front yard. According to Karen, it was not in compliance with neighborhood aesthetic standards, whatever that meant. The man had served his country for 30 years, but heaven forbid his patriotism clash with Karen's vision of suburban perfection. The funeral procession was set to pass through our neighborhood since Mr. Jenkins had specifically requested in his will to take one final drive past the home he had loved. His family had coordinated with local police to ensure a respectful procession, complete with a police escort. I stood on my lawn with several other neighbors, waiting to pay our respects as the line of cars with their headlights on would pass by. That's when I spotted Karen marching down the sidewalk, her face contorted in that familiar expression of righteous indignation that always meant trouble for someone. She was wearing her signature outfit, crisp khaki pants, a polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest, and that ridiculous lanyard with her laminated President badge dangling from it. She had made the badge herself at the local print shop, a fact that never failed to make me roll my eyes. "What's going on here?" she demanded, glaring at the group of us standing solemnly on the curb. "Why are all of you loitering? This is against our community guidelines. Section 4.3 clearly states that." "We're waiting for Mr. Jenkins' funeral procession," Mrs. Abernathy, a sweet elderly woman, explained quietly. "They'll be coming through any minute now." Karen's face twisted into an expression of disbelief. "A funeral procession? Through our neighborhood? Who authorized this?" As HOA president, I should have been consulted. There are protocols for this sort of thing. I couldn't help but interject. "Karen, it's a funeral procession. They have all the necessary permits and police escorts. The family doesn't need HOA approval." She turned to me with that look of disdain I'd grown accustomed to since moving in. Ever since I'd successfully appealed her citation for my non-compliant mailbox at the last community meeting, causing her to lose face in front of everyone, I'd been her favorite target. "I don't believe I was speaking to you, Mr. Harrison," she said with a cold smile. "And actually, any organized activity that impacts traffic flow in our community requires board approval. It's in the bylaws." Before I could respond, we heard the distant wail of a police siren, signaling that the procession was approaching. Everyone fell silent out of respect, everyone except Karen, who was furiously typing on her phone. I could only imagine she was texting the other board members, most of whom were her loyal followers who never questioned her interpretation of the rules. The police motorcycle appeared first, followed by the hearse bearing Mr. Jenkins' flag-draped casket. Behind it came the family's cars and then a long line of vehicles with their headlights on, many with small American flags attached to their windows. It was a moving sight, and I noticed Mrs. Abernathy wiping away tears beside me. Just as the hearse was passing in front of us, Karen did the unthinkable. She marched right into the street, directly in front of the hearse, holding up her hand like some kind of deranged traffic cop. The hearse had to brake suddenly, causing a chain reaction of braking cars behind it. "This procession does not have HOA approval," she shouted loud enough for everyone to hear. "You need to take an alternate route. This is a private community and we have rules." The police officer on the motorcycle circled back and pulled up alongside Karen. "Ma'am, you need to clear the roadway immediately," he said firmly. "This is an authorized funeral procession with the right of way." Karen didn't budge. Instead, she puffed up her chest and flashed her ridiculous badge. "I am the president of this homeowners association, and we have not authorized this procession through our neighborhood. I have the authority to refuse entry to unauthorized vehicles." I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. The second police officer in the procession had now pulled up as well, and Mr. Jenkins' son had stepped out of the car behind the hearse, his face a mixture of grief and disbelief. "Ma'am, interfering with a funeral procession is a criminal offense in this state," the first officer explained, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Please move to the sidewalk now, or I will have to place you under arrest." That should have been the end of it. Any reasonable person would have backed down at this point, maybe tried to save face with a quick apology, and stepped aside. But if there's one thing I've learned about Karen Wilkinson, it's that she's anything but reasonable when her authority is challenged. She actually laughed at the officer. "You can't arrest me for enforcing community guidelines on private property. I know my rights. This procession is in violation of our bylaws, Section 7.2, regarding unauthorized parades and processions." The officer gave Karen one last warning, which she ignored, still standing defiantly in front of the hearse with her hand raised. What happened next was both shocking and, I have to admit, deeply satisfying. The officer calmly stepped off his motorcycle, took out his handcuffs, and informed Karen that she was under arrest for obstruction of a funeral procession, disorderly conduct, and failure to comply with a police officer's lawful order. The look on Karen's face was priceless, pure shock giving way to indignation as she realized this was actually happening. "You can't do this!" she shrieked as the officer gently but firmly guided her arms behind her back and secured the handcuffs. "Do you know who I am? I'm the president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association." "Ma'am, I don't care if you're the president of the United States," the officer replied calmly. "The law applies to everyone equally. Interfering with a funeral procession is a criminal offense that carries a fine of up to $5,000 and potential jail time in this state." As Karen was being placed in the back of a patrol car that had been called to the scene, she looked over at me and the other neighbors watching in stunned silence. "This is all your fault, Harrison," she yelled, her face red with anger and embarrassment. "I'll have you evicted for this. The board will hear about everything." I simply shook my head and turned my attention back to Mr. Jenkins' procession, which had resumed its solemn journey after the brief and unfortunate interruption. We all stood with our hands over our hearts as the hearse continued down the street, trying to restore the dignity of the moment that Karen had so selfishly disrupted. Later that afternoon, word spread quickly through the neighborhood about Karen's arrest. Apparently, she had been taken to the county jail, processed, and had to call her husband to post bail. The charges against her were serious. Interfering with a funeral procession was indeed a criminal offense in our state, something Karen clearly hadn't known despite her obsession with rules and regulations. The most satisfying part came 3 days later, when an emergency HOA board meeting was called. I attended, as did nearly every homeowner in the community. The room was so packed that people were standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. The meeting had been called by the vice president, a reasonable man named Tom who had often tried to temper Karen's more extreme interpretations of the bylaws. "In light of recent events," Tom began, looking uncomfortable but determined, "the board has voted to remove Karen Wilkinson from her position as president of the Homeowners Association, effective immediately." The room erupted in applause. I couldn't help but glance over at Karen, who was sitting in the corner, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her face was a mask of fury, but there was something else there too. The dawning realization that she had finally gone too far. Tom continued once the applause died down. "Additionally, the association will be issuing a formal apology to the Jenkins family for the disruption to their loved one's funeral procession. And finally, our legal counsel has advised us that the association's insurance will not cover Karen's legal expenses in this matter, as her actions were clearly outside the scope of her authority." At this, Karen jumped to her feet. "This is outrageous. Everything I did was to protect this community and enforce our bylaws. You can't just—" "The bylaws actually include a clause about board members engaging in conduct detrimental to the community," Tom interrupted, holding up a copy of the very rulebook Karen had weaponized against everyone else for years. "Your actions have resulted in negative media attention, potential liability for the association, and most importantly, caused pain to a grieving family in our community. The vote was unanimous, Karen." I watched as the color drained from Karen's face. The financial reality was sinking in. She would have to pay for her own legal defense, potentially thousands of dollars, not to mention the fine if she was convicted. And the professional embarrassment was just beginning. I happened to know that Karen worked as a real estate agent specializing in planned communities, and this kind of publicity would be devastating to her career. "You'll be hearing from my attorney," Karen sputtered, gathering her designer handbag and her ever-present clipboard. "This is a witch hunt, and I won't stand for it." Her voice cracked as she spoke, betraying the facade of confidence she was trying to maintain. As she stormed toward the exit, she paused beside my chair and leaned down. "I hope you're happy, Harrison," she hissed quietly so only I could hear. "You've wanted this from the beginning." I looked up at her calmly. "Actually, Karen, all I ever wanted was for you to follow the golden rule instead of just the HOA rules." Apparently, that was too much to ask. Her face contorted with rage, but for once, she had no comeback. As the door slammed behind her, I couldn't help but think that sometimes, justice comes in unexpected ways. For an HOA tyrant who had made everyone's lives miserable with her petty power trips and selective rule enforcement, there was a certain poetic justice in her being undone by her own disregard for rules that actually mattered. Not the color of someone's mailbox, but the basic human decency of allowing a grieving family to honor their loved one with dignity.